Good afternoon, everybody. Colin Livingston here, talking torque. Another Thursday, what we used to call, and we may once again call Thirsty Thursdays, thanks to tonight's guest. We're not going to waste a lot of time here. Bring in my good friend and recently announced 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. host of the Jason Gregor Show, Mr. Jason Gregor. How you doing, man?
Colin, I'm good, buddy.
Awesome. I need to readjust my screen here because you look like you're huge and I look like I'm a slouch. There, at least we look like we're kind of on equal terms here now.
There you go. Yeah, that's true. I thought I thought you just had your chair on low.
I'm actually really reclined here. I'm going off of 3 hours of sleep. We were racing until just past 1 a.m. and flew back from Toronto this morning. So I'm like a mental midget here.
Oh, well, buddy, it's a tough life of racing, man. I don't know anything about that part of it, but I've talked about it.
Yeah, well, you're welcome to join me anytime you like. So let's just jump right in. I think first of all, let's get into the recently announced Sports 1440. Obviously, past life was with TSN radio, but you're kind of unique in the Edmonton radio market that you also own your show. So what is, with the loss of TSN here in Edmonton, there's a lot of people clamoring for, local sports and sports radio in general. So let's talk a little bit about 1440.
Yeah, it's a collaborative effort. Stingray Radio, of course, who has CFCW and K97 and the Breeze. It's located out of West Edmonton Mall. That's where our studio will be. And we're going to have live sports talk from 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. on weekdays to start. And then obviously the plan is going to be to expand that and do more stuff with different sports shows, similar to TSN in the sense that, they ran a lot of, national programming from ESPN and different things like that. So, CBS Sports, I think, is going to be the partner there. And I'm looking forward to it. It's exciting. Edmonton's a huge sports market, and they're very passionate sports fans from, St. Albert, Sherwood Park, Stony Plain, Beaumont, you list them all. And, it's going to be fun. I think it's something that, the feedback from people, they really missed it. They really want it. So, it'll be on radio but also a few new additions. Also it's, AM radio, almost any signal can be a little bit scratchy at times. There's no question about that. So, I always tell people, like, I haven't listened in my car to AM on the dial in 5 years. I always just listened on iHeartRadio on my phone. You just plug it in and, there's really like, I never went over my data and I was listening all the time. So I'm pretty sure I never saw a data charge, which is great. So it's on the Stingray app, iHeartRadio, or the radio player. Anybody out there, you can download it. It's free. So if you're driving around and you're like, man, the signal isn't great, well, that's what you can do. If you're a really astute listener and you don't like the little hissing that happens sometimes on the high dial on AM, then that's the way to get rid of it. It's crystal clear. Obviously, my show is also going to be live on YouTube and Facebook on the Nation Network. They have huge digital platforms. We're going to be pushing out a lot of content after the fact, the racing report and all of our different segments and stuff like that. So, Kevin Karras will be our morning show host. We're going to introduce something that no one really has done in the market. We're going to have a fantasy sports show from 11 to 12 every day on weekdays with Connor Halley and Brandon Douglas. And, fantasy sports is big. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of statistics. So even if you don't play it, I think you'll enjoy this segment because you're going to learn a lot about stats on different players in football and hockey, of course, when it's on, and Major League Baseball and daily fantasy, which everybody plays. Then we have the Lowdown with Low Tide from noon until 2, longtime voice, the calming voice of the station, I would say. And then myself will be 2 to 6.
Now, you've always run with a co-host, and it sounds like you've got someone lined up. Are you ready to talk about who that is yet, or not yet?
No, we've got a big kind of unveiling we're going to have as a countdown, unveiling lots of different parts of the station. You kind of want to build some excitement, and so we'll have like a 10-day countdown, and unveiling different co-hosts, different contributors who are going to be regular guests on the show, stuff like that. So A lot of people that listen to TSN 1260 are going to recognize, some of the names for sure. There's going to be some new contributors for sure, which is exciting. And you know what? There will be, I can say, because I've said this before, Struddy, he's not coming back as a regular co-host just because he's got some other work stuff that he really wants to do. He's passionate about coaching. And more importantly, he's passionate about being a dad. His kids are at an age where, he feels like he'd like to be home for dinner every night with them, which is awesome. So he'll still be involved in the show, just not in the same form. Yep. And so we'll be replacing him with some people that I think everybody's going to like.
Okay. Now the morning guy has been announced.
Kevin Carius.
Yeah, we're able to talk about KK joining the network. So obviously long time sports broadcaster with Global here, probably back to the ITV days. I can't actually remember
26 years, man.
But one of the things that's kind of universal is that local sports on all the whether it's TV or radio, those programs have basically been eliminated. And, through our background with motorsports, I got to know a great number of the local sports personalities. And the one thing that was universally, shared by all of the people is that they were really heartbroken that we were losing that local content. Obviously 1440 is really going to give, guys like KK, yourself, Low Tide really focuses on hockey, but it's going to give, Edmonton local sports a chance to have a voice again.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's really important. And, that was one of the reasons why we looked at Kevin and were able to convince him to come is, not only does he cover the NHL and the CFL and the pro leagues, but, he's done hundreds and thousands of stories on U of A and Nate and Grant McEwen and the AJHL teams and, Prairie Junior football. And, now obviously, there's the River Hawks who had a successful season breaking the attendance record. Yeah. The Edmonton Stingers and, Reed Clark and his group have done a fantastic job building them out. And so, there's lots to talk about, which is excellent. We have 11 hours and, obviously there'll be a fair amount of Oilers talk, but I think other sports matters and people like it. That's been proven. I've hosted a show for 20 years. I don't recall ever getting a text from somebody saying, don't talk about the U of A. Don't talk about this, right? It doesn't happen for the most part. People they're sports fans who listen to the show. And I think they kind of like to know what's going on in their community.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was eye-opening. And I was honestly shocked with the outpouring of comments from, people, fans, listeners, once the 1260 station went off the air. I mean, for me, 1260 was radio in Edmonton when I was a kid. Like that was a music station when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then, I didn't really know the connection between you and John Short until you had kind of published how you had gotten into radio by actually partnering with John, who showed you that model of, owning your time slot. For people who don't know, can you talk a little bit about John and what his place in, in Edmonton radio history really, again, sorry, I'm a bit brain dead here, but like how important John was to not just, sports, but sports radio here in Edmonton.
Oh man. I'm pretty certain that John was like the first daily, weekly sports talk show host in Canada way back in the early 80s. And so that's really where my interest in sports radio started was listening to John in the truck with my dad and my brother and my mom, driving home from games, different times, different people. And, I had the opportunity to work with John when I was in school at Nate, and I was in my third semester. It was January of 2000, and John needed an on-site engineer. Well, an engineer is the wrong word, producer, to set up all the equipment and stuff like that. And so John interviewed me and basically just asked me sports questions, which was amazing. And, luckily I got the job with him and worked. And, I worked together with John for 5 years, and I learned a ton just about being a radio host and, lots of different things. He had some unbelievable stories from his time, because he worked for CP. He was always a writer first, he told me, and then he got into radio. So, and, John could like any sport, anytime, right? That was his motto for a long time on sports talk. So I just kind of grew up listening to him talk boxing. Like him and George Chuvalo were buddies. And so he had some unbelievable Chuvalo stories, and he would talk boxing, but then he would talk baseball and his love of the Detroit Tigers. And, then he would mix in, of course, like he worked for the Edmonton Oilers for 1 year with Peter Pocklington. Man, did he have some stories about old Peter the Puck. So, you know what? He had an unreal career, and it was great to get to work with John because, he taught me a lot about the industry, good and bad. And, it was so fun. So, he was really kind of that extra catalyst for me, and where my passion from sports talk radio began as a young kid. Like you can talk to a lot of people from my generation, Colin, yourself included, who, when they went to bed at night, back when you had the old clock radio and you would put it under your pillow, so hopefully your parents didn't hear you, and you'd want to listen a half hour more of Short at Night because he was 9 to midnight. And that was, that was amazing. I still remember it, man. Grade 9 and 10. Back when you had a waterbed. I don't know if people even know what that is, but I had a waterbed. It was money. And, I had the clock radio right there. And so parents, good night. Yeah, good night, Mom, Dad. And then, you'd listen a little bit longer and stretch it out. And sometimes you'd be tired and you regret it the next day. But man, I used to love doing that. I actually, I started calling into John's show a few times when I was, I think, 14 or 15 when they had kids night. And it was awesome. So it was a thrill to get to work with John and someone I call a friend. He was definitely a mentor of mine. He's somebody I looked up to. It was an honor. And one of the highlights of my career was when I organized a kind of a surprise 80th birthday party for him. And we brought him on air and brought him in studio and had a lot of his friends from his past and stuff come on. And it was, John's a great guy.
Yeah. I mean, I when I was a kid, we had a radio in our kitchen. Okay. And it was set perpetually to 1260. So we would listen to, the radio throughout the day. I mean, obviously on weekends or, summers or what have you, and vividly remember, John's show. So, I mean, that's really cool because, in a lot of ways they say you shouldn't meet your heroes because, they usually can't live up to what your expectation is. But that's such a great story that obviously, not only did he meet your expectations, but, was probably able to exceed them.
Oh, no, it was great. I always joke, though. Let's be clear. John was never my hero. I always bug him about that. So, no, but he was somebody that I for sure looked like. It was honestly like it's funny when you think back in your life. Like I remember going to have an interview with John, and it was at Northlands Park because that's where he used to do a show at night in the early 2000s. And so he's like, well, hey, why don't you come down here? And it was an interview at like 7:30. And so we have a conversation, kind of, give him a little background here and that. I mentioned, I used to call into your show, John. And he's just like, oh, really? Oh, yeah. And I was like, yeah, Jason from New Sarepta. And he was like, oh, my, now maybe he remembered, maybe he didn't, but he sure sounded like he did. And then we just proceeded to kind of ask me my view on sports for 20 minutes. And then when I started working for him, I was kind of nervous the first few nights, like you're just there. I'm not saying anything. And then one night, one of the guests didn't show up, and John's sitting there and he's like, hey, put your headset on. And he just asked me some questions. And that was kind of the start of my broadcast career. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because you've already hit on about 5 points that I've made notes that I want to cover here tonight. I'll go back because you mentioned how John was, first and foremost a writer, which is, something that you also share. You're actually quite prolific with your writing. Not only do you post for, Oilers Nation, but you also, not just, professionally, but personally write things. Like I've still got a copy of the email you sent out back in 2020, regarding the passing of your father, very, very, well written. I don't know if you want to calling it an email isn't quite right, but that's just how you transmitted it, talking about the importance of your father and family and all the rest of it. But you write an awful lot. Now, was that something you learned from John, or is that something you've always had?
Well, not so much from John. Honestly, I started writing for a few reasons. Like my mother was, my mom is a former teacher. She was vice principal. Then she wrote the Social 30 curriculum for many years for the Alberta government. Then she would evaluate teachers. She's got her doctorate. My mom's one of the smartest people I know. And so we grew up in our household that, English grammar was fairly important. And so, I had a decent grasp of it. I wouldn't say I was a great writer to start. I still like when I see other guys who I think are great writers, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could write like that. But I write better, Colin, sometimes when it's just like personal stories that I feel I can bring out the emotion that way. I think me personally, that's what I feel I'm best at. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'd asked John about it, but the big reason why I got into it was because I was in radio at the time and I was doing a night show, and you know, I'd have some ideas because, you know, I was pretty connected to the football team, and I'd talk about it on my show. And then 2 days later, I'd see it written somewhere. And I was like, man, like that's more permanent than a late night radio show. When you got to remember, there was no internet. People weren't archiving your shows way back in the early 2000s. So Lee Nohos from Edmonton Sports Scene, for anybody who maybe remembers that, it was a small kind of independent little paper that had just wrote about the sports. And so I got to write in there. And the only way you get better as a writer, the only way you get better as a radio host, the only way you get better as a race car driver, anything in life, is you need reps and you got to do it more. And so, you know, I was writing there where I actually started writing, true story, because I wanted to get into it. And I was playing men's league for a few years before I moved my show to to 9 o'clock at night. Like when I did my show at 11, I could play men's league because I wouldn't miss many games. Once I went to 9, I missed too many games, so I quit. But so I was starting writing, and so I would write pretend game summaries of our men's league games and then email it out to all the guys. Now, you know, and like I would pretend, okay, so, you know, we play this team and here was a score. And then I would make up quotes like I interviewed the guys. And usually the quotes were rather like, you know, chirping with inside jokes and stuff, but it was teaching me how to write, you know, in sentence and try to incorporate a quote into the article. And it was kind of fun. The guys got a laugh out of it for sure, because there was a lot of chirps in there. And, you know, ask so-and-so, and he'd be ripping on guys, like quotes you would never actually hear from a professional athlete. So, but it was more so learning how to write. So I actually did that for 2 years after games, like the next day or something, I would write the show. So that kind of was a way to get started. And honestly, Susan Hedberg is a friend of mine. And she actually, when I started writing for Sports Scene and stuff and other places, she was my editor, and she was unbelievable. She helped me so much. And not only just edit your stuff, Colin, but she would send it back with like explanations as to why this was this way. And that really helped me become a writer. No question about it. Susan Hedberg probably had the biggest influence on making my stuff, coherent.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a really, really difficult task to master or to even become proficient, even though they're your thoughts. You know, it's got to be worded in such a way so that, you know, it's not too wordy. You know, the rule that I have for myself is that if I can take a sentence that's 10 words and chop it to 7, that's a much better sentence than, you know, I tend to add, you know, too many words. And that's where it's great to have an editor, or now to have things like Grammarly or what have you. But you've shared over the years some of the texts that come into the text line, or some of the quotes that come in. And I think people, you know, when you're a public figure like yourself, people seem to think that they know who you are just by your personality that you share on the air, which is clearly not who any public figure is. You know, their persona that they demonstrate when they're doing their show, that's not who they are as a human being. That's just really one little element of it. And people can be really critical, or, you know, just down to belligerent. Like, how much time do you spend trying to change people's perceptions of who they think you are, versus how much time do you just kind of ignore the hate?
Well, the best advice I got many years ago was, if you start listening too much to criticism from people you would never ask advice for, you might go down a slippery slope. And so that's always in the back of my mind. As a sports talk, like I think talk show like would be similar, where, you know what, it's not a persona. I go by my real name. I like, now there's times when I might take a stance on a player or a team that I know is going to generate some excitement amongst the audience. That happens for sure. But for the most part, I kind of talk like how I am. I'm a little bit like, I'm not afraid of a debate. I care about the community. You know, I care about my family. I think it's important for people to try as much as they can to just be a good person, right? Like, you know, we promote a lot in our show, just be a good guy. Like, everybody can have a bad day, but just try not to be like, you know, like I tell my son, when you make a mistake, try to keep them to 3s or 4s out of 10. It's when you make the 9s and 10s that you can't come back from. So, you know, you'll have people more so when they hear something, they think they heard you say that. And I'm like, well, I didn't really say it that way, or that's not what I said. And so, you know, I would say most people are pretty good with it. Some you can tell, like on the text line, you can see the history of someone. And so some people, it's just like, you know what? what was the saying about how, never argue with the stupid person because they'll beat you with experience.
Yeah,
And
they'll drag you down to their level and then
yeah,
beat you with
so,
experience.
there's some days where, you know what, it's not worth it. And then there's other days where somebody's like, maybe they're just having a bad day and they need to vent, and that's fine. I don't think you can be a sports talk host where people want to hear your opinion. People are going to disagree with you. And I always tell people, if we all agreed, it would be boring, right?
Yeah.
So you can agree with me on Tuesday about the evaluation of Leon Draisaitl, and then on Wednesday completely disagree with me on my evaluation of Darnell Nurse. That's totally fine, right? It doesn't matter. So I haven't had, like, I probably used to, respond more than I do now. I think that's just, you come with age. I've read a lot of books about, when people say you get wiser with age, it is true. You just learn to say, you know what, I don't really need to respond here. There's not much I can say, because some people's already made up their mind, and that's okay. They're entitled to their opinion, and I'm entitled not to care about their opinion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when people get somebody like you that again, it's not like you're controversial, but sometimes you say things that people don't want to hear. Or, we saw it a lot when we would talk about racing, that if, I mentioned Red Bull and people are big Red Bull fans, then all of a sudden they want to fight about Red Bull and like, you're wrong. No, Red Bull's great. Or, Ferrari or whatever it is. And, then it becomes, well, you're an asshole for thinking like, well, wait a second, were we talking about this, or you may be just angry in your life about a lot of other things, and this is just your way to lash out? But, I've had the privilege of getting to know you fairly well over the last 5 years that we've done, the radio show together, the CanTorque Race Report, which is very cool that we're going to be able to bring that back, but also personally, on a number of different things. And one of the things, I mean, it's a really easy number to throw around, but through your radio show, you've been able to raise over $2 million for various charities. That's not insignificant. That's very, very cool. And then things like, Gregor's grads to help underprivileged, students with tuxedos or suits for graduation. Obviously, philanthropy is a big part of your life, but I don't think a lot of people really understand that that's more about who you are than the guy who's on the radio, trying to pump somebody's tires from time to time.
I really believe that most people generally want to help other people. And in some cases, they don't know how to go about it. They don't know, which charity to support or something like that. And so, like, I kind of stumbled on the little bit, like, I learned a few lessons. Like, my father was never a real big talker to us. Like, he was super funny. He was very loving, but he wasn't the dad that would like give you speeches all the time. Right. But when he said some things, I usually listen. And there's a few times in my life where, I remembered, I think I was 13. We were living in Leduc at the time. And for some reason we were downtown Edmonton. I don't even know why. And anyway, we were walking. Maybe we had dropped, I think we might've dropped somebody off at the bus depot. And as we were walking back to the car, this man came up to my father and was in tears, and how he really needed to get home, and he needed $20 for a bus ticket or something. And so at the time, my dad had just been laid off, and, and we didn't have a lot of money, but my dad still gave him $20. And I remember we're driving home, and, I'm kind of like, I was like, geez, Dad, I thought you told me I can't remember what it was, like some glove or whatever. And he was like, well, you didn't need that, and like, that guy really needed to see his family. And you know what? He needed the $20 more than we did, and, we'll be fine. And you know what? At the time, I'm kind of like, whatever. But that story really stuck with me, and I remembered it at different times. And so if you're in a position where you can help people or get others to help them with you, and that's, the listeners on my show have been amazing for so long. So many of them have the same willingness to want to help out others. And so when I bring it up, the topic, they're like, we're in. And, they bid on auction items, or they do our pyramid of giving, where it's a full, just straight donation at a different monetary value. And, it's really heartwarming, though. That's the thing that, I get a lot of enjoyment out of. It's fulfillment. Like, it's great to see when you can help other people. There's no doubt in my mind. And so, like when I have sponsors who come and help me for Gregor's grads, part of the deal is any of my big sponsors, I say, okay, I love your money and that's awesome, but I want you to come to a fitting and just see how the boys react when they get that suit the first time.
Right.
And because now you see where your money goes. And I think that can be more powerful. Like you're a big corporation and a lot of them give a lot of money and they donate it, but that's one element. If you can see where your money goes, it touches people different. And so I found that works. And we talk about it on air. Obviously there's certain times it's private information, so you can't say it, but you try to give people, a storyline of where the money's going and why it's important. And, so many people out there truly want to help others. Even sometimes, like I've had people say, man, I can only afford a $50 donation. I'm like, dude, don't ever say sorry for wanting to help others. I don't care if it's $50, $500, it's all relevant. It's all the same, because if that's what you're capable of giving, if it's only $10, that's fine. It all adds up.
Yeah. I mean, no matter how you slice it, $1 million is still made up of pennies.
Yeah.
Every little bit, gets there to the end. Now, one thing people might not know about you if they don't know anything about your personal life, you mentioned New Sarepta, but with that, you guys have a really strong farming background.
Yeah.
And you spend a lot of time, even to this day, even though, the dynamic of the farm has changed a little bit in the last couple of years, you spend a lot of time essentially as a farmer, and you still enjoy going back to the farm and kind of teaching your son about, all the rest of that. What is it about farming that's so important to you?
Oh man. How much time do we got?
As much as you want.
I'll be honest, I'm pretty lucky. I do a job that I truly enjoy, right? Like there's very few days, Colin, that I'm just like, oh God, I got to work. Like talking sports, like I'm like, this is pinch me. It's a dream job. But if there was one job that I could do that might be more enjoyable, it would be having my own farm of like 300 head of cattle. And just it's hard to explain. I've always kind of had a connection with animals from a young age. My mom told me the story. I was like 3 once, and I'd not ran away, but I just left the barnyard in the house with our dog by myself at 3 and walked all the way like a kilometer away from the house in our field to bring the cows up. And I was never scared of animals. I really like them. There's something special about calving season when the odd time when you have to help a cow, and if you're not there, that calf's probably not living. And it was amazing. And also the farm just really taught me work ethic, right? Like you get up in the morning, you're picking rocks, the cows look at you and they're like, you could be a doctor, you could be a celebrity, actor, famous. They're like, I don't care who you are. I want you to feed me. And
Feed me. Yeah.
right. And there's just something simplistic about it. It's very calming. I loved going to the farm when things get a little high paced in the city and just relaxing, right? It's quiet. It's very serene. It's very calm. I have so much respect for farm life for a lot of people. I'm probably biased. I feel it helped instill a work ethic in me that maybe I wouldn't have had anywhere else. Yeah, I know there's tons of people who grew up, in urban areas that have a great work ethic. So, maybe I would have had that anyway, but just at the farm, like you learned to work and you didn't complain. That's just kind of what it was. And like we sold our cows last November. This is the first year we didn't have calves at the farm. And man, well, since I can remember, I think it's 40 years, probably since we moved to Leduc and rented our farm for 3 years. So yeah, that'd be like many years ago, man. And it was different. Like, I'll be honest, I didn't miss having to go and bed the cows and feed them in -30. I didn't really miss that, but I really missed the calving season aspect. And, we've rented out our pasture land. So we have a cow calf, one of our neighbors' cows or calves are there. So at least I can go and see the cows, but it's not the same. They're not mine. I'm not calving any of them or anything like that. And but it was a great run, and it was awesome. So much about it, the garden and having fresh food from yourself. Like from a young age as a kid, part of my job was helping my mom plant the garden. And back then it was a big garden. Right. And so, but it was rewarding. Like it sucked planting all the seeds. You're like, as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, God, this is brutal. But then all of a sudden your corn comes up and this, you have cucumbers and peas and fresh beets, and man, nothing beats it.
That's a lie. I can't stand beets, but that's just
buddy.
No.
Beets are so good.
I would honestly
you heat them up on the stove and then they just peel off, man. So juicy. I love it.
No, I would punch every beet in the face. I can't stand whatever it is. I don't know. There's something in it that even if I don't know that it's like an ingredient, I'll smell it, I'll taste it, and I have to get rid of the whole dish. There's something about them, but everything else is great. Okay. Now, getting back to sports radio, one of the things you do extremely well, and I have no idea where this comes from or what your secret is, but kind of tying in the arguments that people make about various sports, whether they're hostile, whether they're hostile or legitimate, you've got a knack for statistics that really prove your point. Like whether it's, talking about whether we should buy out this free agent, whether we should make an offer for that one, whether the team should do this, that, or the other thing. And people will talk about, their personal feeling, and you'll always come back with some statistic, which has always fascinated me. Like what, and I don't want you to give up your trade secrets, but where do you source all that? And more than anything, you can find stats for pretty much anything, but how do you find a way to manipulate them or utilize them in the way that you do to kind of prove a point?
Well, I learned a long time ago, in law and ethics and in debate class, where they talked about your opinion's only valid to the point that you can defend it, right? And so if you can defend, you might not like my opinion, but if I can defend it with valid, data, statistics, or different things, science. Obviously, we don't do a lot of science on the show, maybe in working out, I guess. But
but that's also a side effect of having Struddy as a co-host for so long.
True.
That would never play.
So that, that's something, from a young age, like I always liked math. It was one of my favorite subjects. So I think, naturally I read, I've got a pretty good memory. That helps. It's not as good now as it was before. That's age thing, but it's still pretty good, I find. And so a lot of it comes from reading, Colin. Like I read a lot, probably, 3-4 hours a day before the show. I'm reading different things or I'm writing. And so when I'm writing an article, I'm recalling a lot of the stuff that I'm writing. And I like to dig deeper into topics sometimes and be like, hey, okay, I understand why, you don't like this player. Like there's a simple one because it's a hot topic in Edmonton all the time. And, people like to say how overpaid Darnell Nurse is, right? So I'm like, okay, so you don't like his contract. Fair. But, when you start saying, well, he should only be a $6 million defenseman, I'm like, okay, pump the brakes. You have to look at it realistically. You have to remove emotion. And so you look at the timing of his contract and you say, what are the other 5 comparisons in his contract? Well, look at 5 other defensemen: Morgan Riley, Seth Jones, Zach Werenski, Dougie Hamilton, for instance. And if you add Nurse, the average salary cap hit of those 5 is $8.625 million. Darnell Nurse makes $9.25. So if you want to say he's $600,000 overpaid, sure, just by going on average, okay. Keep in mind, the minimum salary in the NHL is $775,000. So you can't even sign one player to replace that. And oh, by the way, do you think Leon Draisaitl might be $600,000 underpaid? So it probably evens out at the end of the road, right? But Darnell Nurse plays the most minutes of any defenseman in the NHL. In the last 3 years, he's 3rd in the NHL in even strength goals. He's 9th in points. I think he's 7th in plus minus at even strength. So, he's not a perfect player because very few are, but he does a lot of really good things well. I think it's fair to say at times he can be, a victim of him trying to do too much and make a real glaring error. And so natural human instincts in psychology is we'll remember the one really bad play, Colin, but there could be 90 really or just subtle good plays, but they don't stand out in our memory bank. And that's actually just normal. So it's not like It doesn't even mean that you hate a person. That's just a little bit how we work as human beings. So I try to want people to think a little bit and say, okay, well, what about this aspect? And say, hey, you can not like Darnell Nurse. That's totally fine. You can not like Connor McDavid if you don't want, but there's certain statements that you just can't make, or I'm going to question you on those. Yeah. And then we can have a conversation. You don't have to agree with me, but I find that that's better than just, yelling and screaming or letting people hyperbolize. Hyperbolize happens way too often in sports analysis. And I think it's kind of lame.
But it also comes down to how people perceive someone's attitude. And it's not whether they're a good player or a bad player. It's whether they like them or don't based on something that they perceive that's not really based in fact.
Yeah. And that's okay. And so that's the one thing. There's always going to be emotion involved. And so you always have to factor in. And some people say, well, you know what? Maybe I just don't like him, or I don't like her. I don't like how she plays. I don't like how he plays. Fine. That, and as long as you acknowledge that, I can say, well, because I can't tell you you're wrong in saying, you know what? I just don't like how this player performs. Okay. That's like, you can't argue that. You're allowed to have that thought. Sure. But when you add on things that are then factually or statistically incorrect, then that's when we can have a discussion.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we'll wrap up here. I really appreciate the time you've given. I got a couple more questions for you, but obviously we're bringing back the CanTorque Race Report, which obviously is
Yes.
very important to me as one of the principal of CanTorque and the guy who does, a lot of the legwork for that part of it. But over the years, you've become a legitimate race fan.
Oh,
Like,
dude. Like,
I
honestly,
don't know
you helped me. Like, I'm a big sports fan. I like learning new things about sports. Like, obviously, Drive to Survive, that helped learn. Because if you get to know personalities, like, I'll be honest, like, my wife is much more of an F1 fan than I am. Like, her
Sure.
and my son, I'm like, what's going on in my house? It's like Sunday morning at 7:30 and they're watching F1 races. And I'm like, what kind of bizarro world is this? Like, that never would have been something that happened a few years ago. And I think it's great. So what really got her involved in that was she liked Lewis Hamilton's story of how he grew up and how he came into being a racer. And he wasn't like your typical one. He didn't come from a rich background, and that just resonated with
$0.
her.
Yeah.
Right. And he seemed like he was a nice guy. Right. There's other guys she thought were funny. And guess what? Like in any sport, you got to have somebody that you don't like. She's not a big Max Verstappen fan. So it's, that's great in sports. And so, you respect that he's obviously a good driver. I don't think anyone could debate that, but it got me into F1. But I will say I've become more of an Indy fan this past year because it's just more competitive to watch. Like, we know Max is winning in F1. Like, God, like right now, Max Verstappen winning a race, you get about the same. You can't even bet on that and get any sort of odds. Like Connor McDavid to get 2 points in a hockey game this year. Like, you used to be like, well, geez, bet 2 points tonight, you could get decent odds. You couldn't even do that anymore because McDavid was so good. Right. So that's it. To me, it's anticlimactic. And even when McDavid's good, the Oilers can still lose. But Max Verstappen right now, like, he can't lose. So unless
like
he
Harlem Globetrotters and Washington Generals right now.
Like, unless there's an accident, so I'm kind of like, well, I don't want to watch just for second place all the time. So I have found myself watching a little bit more IndyCar, just because like there's 7 or 8 different guys have won. There's more lead changes, there's more passing. So I found myself gravitating towards that a little bit more.
You look at an IndyCar race and ask who's going to win, and you can't answer that. No. You've got a 1 in 15 chance of getting that right. But I pulled this gem up from before, just kind of showing how far Mr. Gregor's come here over the years. And this was going back, I think it was last year when Vettel was kind of popping off about Canada's energy industry, and you managed to tie in philanthropy, racing, and being a proud Albertan into one tweet, talking about how there's a bit of a irony with Seb not cracking the top 15 in the race, but talking about Canada's energy industry while at the same time being sponsored by Saudi Aramco.
Yeah. So, and by the way, hey, like, I know Sebastian Vettel is a guy who stood up to, didn't agree with all that. And so that's great.
Yeah.
I just, at times, when you're from Alberta and you hear about all the negativity about, the oil field and stuff all the time, when it's everybody who works there and anybody who can have a sane discussion recognizes that Alberta oil is some of the cleanest, if not the cleanest in the world.
Correct.
Right. That's, I'm not even sure that's up for debate very much on that. So yeah, there's times when I'm just like, don't get on a pedestal. And can they all get better? Sure. But to look at the one that's got the cleanest oil and be that the one you're attacking when there's significantly other places that are doing far worse. Yeah. I think it's important to stand up for the people. And I worked in the oil field before I got into me. I used to do ultrasonic testing for downhole drill pipe. I also worked at API valve, right? So premium oil field inspections. And so I understand all that. I have a huge respect for all the men and women who work in the oil field, man. It's a tough gig. And it can be lucrative time, but it also can be very emotionally draining. You're away from your family a lot. You got to work a lot of hours, sometimes in brutal cold conditions outside. I'll never forget working in Fort Liard at -50, like, shoot me. It's not the highlight of my life, but so yeah, I have a definite soft spot and a huge respect for the oil field.
Well, and it's what really funds a big portion of Canada's economy. But so we got a really, really good comment. We don't have the race report for another couple of weeks, but my old friend, Dr. Helmut Marko, who's the special consultant for Red Bull, made a comment this week. And I don't know if you saw it, but I'll throw it at you here unprompted because I want to get your feedback. And we spent a lot of time. I was with Alex, obviously, earlier this week. We were racing in Ontario, but Helmut Marko said, If you put Max Verstappen in the AlphaTauri or the Haas, he will put it on pole. And
well, let's see it. Like, how can we say with any remote truth if that's real? Like, I don't believe that Max Verstappen is 25 seconds better as a natural driver than the other best drivers in the world. Now, maybe I'm wrong on that, but is he one of the best drivers in the world? Without question.
Clearly.
I don't think there's any debate on that. But see, when you make statements like that in F1, then let's get all the let's put all the cars on. I would love to see it. I would hope that F1 would do this, right? The cars are faster than Indy.
AlphaTauri is Red Bull's team. They could literally
do it for a race.
Drivers.
Right? Yes, he's won the championship title, but you know why they'll never do it? Because if he doesn't, or if he doesn't win or whatever, then there's too much to risk, right? So it's an easy statement to make, and it's a smart statement in one sense because it's going to fire up people, right? So that's great. Like, a little controversy isn't bad when it's something like that that's kind of harmless. Like, it's not sexist. It's, it's nothing like that. But it's one that there's no way to actually prove it unless you put him in the vehicle. And we know that he's not going to go in that vehicle in a race. All right, I shouldn't say we know. Like, I would be floored, Colin, if they actually did that. But it would be great. Let's be honest. Let's say, because does he have the championship title wrapped up? I think he does statistically.
Not technically, but practically, yes.
Okay, so once he does, that's the time to do it. What do you got to lose?
Here's the thing. They put Daniel Ricciardo, who was a Red Bull reserve driver, they put him in for the tire test for Red Bull, and Christian Horner said that within a few laps, he turned a time that was fast enough that would have put him P2 at Silverstone, which had just run that weekend. So they're already saying Danny Ricciardo was, with zero experience in that car, with zero time in that car, was able to get to P2. Now he's in the AlphaTauri and is a second and a half off of Verstappen's pace. Now, the same driver in the Red Bull was close. In the AlphaTauri wasn't. Now, the statement that Marco made is completely preposterous. Couldn't put him in a Haas car no matter what, because that's not their team. But while it's great to kind of get people talking, it's also extraordinarily demeaning to their AlphaTauri drivers, saying that, the reason why the AlphaTauri isn't up front is because these drivers really suck. And if we put Max in that car, it would be like, how disheartening and how discouraging is a statement like that? Now, again, I'm not asking you to speak on his behalf, but it was just such a boneheaded thing, because it's a zero gain kind of statement, and all it does is serve to piss off your existing staff at your associated company.
Yeah, I'm guessing when he said it, he probably wasn't thinking that. I think he's more so like, we're so confident in Max, we're going to say all that stuff, right? I would, because I know some diehard F1 fans will say, no, Constructor Series, Red Bull should be applauded for being better. And that makes sense from that regard. Okay, I completely understand.
Yeah.
But it would be awesome to see the top F1 drivers all race in an equal car.
They're talking about it right now, adding motorsport to the Olympics in, I can't remember what it was, like in the next 8 years. Yeah. Where that's the discussion.
So when they did that, you would race for your country and everybody would have to have the same vehicle?
Correct.
Because that would be awesome.
Well, I mean, they haven't announced any of the details, but that's the speculation, is like, do you put them in go-karts? Do you put them in like a Race of Champions kind of car where they compete on, like, Race of Champions will 1 year race in Mexico. They've done it on ice. They, mix it all up. But I, like, as much as I love motorsport, I don't think that it belongs at the Olympics. Like, yes, they're world-class athletes, but like, I don't know. We'll see what happens with it, though.
Well, it'd be expensive to put it on. Like, the Olympics is expensive as it is, for goodness sake. So, like, hey, if we're getting on to me, the Olympics should have 4 host cities and they just rotate.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Stop wasting billions of dollars to put it in some countries where, you use the facilities and then they just rot. So,
just like the World Cup.
Yeah.
Yeah. So last question for you, my man. What is one perception that people have of you or what you do that isn't true or that you want to correct?
Ooh. That's a good question.
Bingo.
Probably that people always say, "Oh, Gregor wants to win an argument." I don't look at arguments as winning or losing. I'm like, hey, I'm not gonna allow you to get away with saying something that I believe, well, especially if it's statistically incorrect. So it's not about win. A debate isn't about winning or losing. We're not in a debate club, right? It's about saying something that's factual or not. And if you debate with facts, I've had some really healthy debates with people about facts, and it's awesome. It's more so when they come in with stuff that just is easy to say, well, that's actually physically or factually incorrect. So it's not about winning the argument. It's about, I believe as a society, we've become too accepting of people spreading falsehoods and getting away with it.
Couldn't agree more. Love it, man. Really looking forward to getting back on air with you here in a couple of weeks. Congratulations on the new gig. Throw this up here for everyone to see. New Sports 1440 coming to Edmonton here September 5th at 7 a.m. Now, are you going to be part of that morning show with KK?
Yes, I think I'll be in for the open. We kind of want to address all of our listeners and together and kind of announce everything that's coming. So yeah, it'll be. I'll have to get up early once, Colin, but never again.
Well, but you're a farmer. This is not new.
It's true, yeah, but yeah, you know what's funny? I would get up early for calving season, no problem. I used to have to. My dad and I, even in high school, we kind of had to rotate shifts where one guy would get up if I got up at 10, I'd have to get up at 2. He would get up at midnight and 4, kind of thing. So that I could do, but getting up for school at 6 in months when it wasn't calving season, I found that way harder. It's weird.
Yeah. Hopefully we get some of my favorites carrying on with the Gregor show, like story time and the guest of the week, and you even covered video games. Like you talked
that was about, actually, that was one of my favorite segments, man. Like people got fired up about it. Like my son's old enough now that he's starting to play. Like we had a deal he could get a PS5 when he was 10, so he's like counting down the days. But like the video games they play now, man, like. I've got an old school arcade stand-up game, and that's the only one I play with my son because it's the only one I can win at. The new games, I don't play enough, and he just crushes me. It's embarrassing.
1943 forever, man. I love that game.
Oh, that's a good one. Galaga, man. I love Galaga.
But they're all good, man. Classic. Gregor, thanks, man. Really appreciate the time. Again, looking forward to getting things rolling here, September 5th, and we'll talk soon.
You betcha. Thank Mabel says hi. That's my dog. She needs to go outside, so it's perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Okay, take care, bud.
See you later.
All right, see ya. Man, so good to have Gregor back on. Really happy for all those guys. Gregor, Kevin Carius, one of the best sports guys that Edmonton's ever produced as a broadcaster. And then some of our other friends like Tom Gazzola will be dropping in, super happy for Connor Halley to have his own show from, I think it's 11 to noon or noon till 1 o'clock. I can't remember the exact times, but I think that's about it. Next week, we'll be doing a lot of recap, lots going on. We need to talk about our NASCAR races on dirt, some of the stuff that's going on with go-karts, Felipe Massa trying to sue former F1 management for the 2008 championship. There's a million things to go over, but we'll do that again here next week. Thanks for watching.